Are we born sinners? Is original sin and total depravity biblical? In this series, we'll consider the doctrine's historic and modern articulations, take a critical look at potential problems that arise, examine the various passages used to teach this, considering the immediate and larger context and the grammar and word choice as we seek to be good Bereans. In this episode, we'll consider the meaning and origin for the term concupiscence. Within Judaism, there is a concept known as the yetser, an idea that within every human being there are God-given drives and ambitions, instinct and appetite. When God created man in Eden, he blessed these things and declared them good, and they are good when used as God intended. However, when misused, they become evil and can lead to death. For example, God gave man an appetite and taste buds to enjoy eating, and he encouraged Adam to eat from any tree in the garden save one. However, Adam used this appetite to eat from the forbidden tree and thus sinned. And today men can surrender to that same appetite and give themselves over to gluttony. Yet no one would claim the simple act of eating is sinful. Likewise, God gave Adam sexual organs and drives and commanded him to be fruitful and multiply. And he made the experience pleasurable and the means by which life is perpetuated and the family grows. Yet men can surrender unto these desires and misuse them as well, engaging in all manner of sexual sin. So we see the yetser, that God-given drive and appetite, can be used for good, and when used for good, it is called the yetser ha-tov. Or these drives and appetites can be used for evil, and when used for evil, it is called the yetser hara, while the yetser itself is simply neutral. Roughly 100 years before Augustine of Hippo would define and defend original sin, the Breshith Rabbah, a Jewish midrash collecting ancient interpretations of Genesis, was written. Breshith in Hebrew means in the beginning, and it's the first word and title of the book of Genesis. Their rabbis made note of the yetser and expounded on different ways to understand these drives and appetites, but always noting that they were God-given and good when rightly used. Within such rabbinic literature, there is an understanding that man must constantly rule over his appetites and ambitions lest he fall into sin. One passage in Scripture from which they derive this concept is in Genesis 4, 6, and 7. Where God tells Cain, "If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it." Now here, this Hebrew idiom, sin is crouching at the door, simply means that sin is seeking an opportunity in Cain's life. God never told Cain that he was born with sin ruling over him, but rather that he was born into a world where sin wanted to rule over him, and instead he must master it. God was warning Cain that he must keep his drives, ambitions, and appetite in check, lest he stumble into sin. In Isaiah 26:3, we see another reference to the yetser, where we read that you keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. Here we clearly see that the yetser refers to the mind of a man, and does not imply or demand a wicked mind, just the mind of a man, which can be used for good or evil. In 1 Chronicles 28:9, we read, "And you, Solomon, my son, know the God of your father and serve him with a whole heart and a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands all the imaginations and thoughts. If you seek him, he will be found by you, but if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever." So here we see that the yetser is speaking of a man's thoughts and ambitions. Again, not inherently evil thoughts, not inherently sinful ambitions, but rather a potential for either good or evil. In Genesis 8:21, we see the intention of man's heart become set on evil by his youth. Now, the Hebrew word translated as youth is naur, and it's the same Hebrew word used to describe the age of David when he faced Goliath. It's used to describe the age when men marry, how old men are when they have children, and it even describes the age of young prostitutes. Now, here this word that's translated as intention or imagination, again, is yetser. Throughout the Old Testament, we see this Hebrew term yetser used rather consistently to describe man's thoughts and ambitions, his appetites, and in the New Testament, we see the Greek parallel epithumia used. Epithumia also means a desire, longing, an appetite, and it can be used positively or negatively depending on how these desires manifest. For example, in Mark 4:19, Jesus explains his parables to the apostles, telling them the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires, that word being epithumia, for other things enter in and choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. And in John 8:44, Jesus rebukes the Pharisees and tells them, "You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires." Again, desire being epithumia. "He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies." Yet in Luke 22:15, Jesus uses this exact same term to describe his own feelings when he told his disciples, "I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." So if we claim these desires are inherently evil and the result of Adam's sin in Eden, then to be consistent, we must claim Jesus had inherently evil desires and suffered the cursed nature of original sin. But this, of course, would disqualify him from being our Redeemer, because the Messiah must be the sinless and spotless Lamb. So we can see the same line of thought carried over from the Hebrew understanding of yetser within the Old Testament to the Greek epithumia of the New. Men have God-given appetites, drives, and ambitions which can be used for good or evil. As we read in 1 John 3:7 and 8, "Little children, let no one deceive you. Whoever practices righteousness is righteous as he is righteous. Whoever makes a practice of sinning is of the devil, for the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil." Now, during the 5th century, as the Roman Empire lost military strength and suffered from political infighting, numerous Germanic tribes began invading Europe, destroying schools and places of learning. As a result, many lost the ability to read, write, and speak both Hebrew and Greek, and those Christians in the West were cut off from the church in the East and classic Christian teaching. Western theologians lacked the opportunity, the resources to be corrected, as they invented theology that often contradicted orthodoxy. It was against this setting that Augustine of Hippo began formulating his concept of original sin. As a former Manichaean Gnostic and Neoplatonist, Augustine often filtered the scriptures through these presuppositions. Complicating matters even further, Augustine based some of his understanding off of a letter that he mistakenly believed was written by Ambrose of Milan, the bishop who baptized him. However, the identity of the author remains a mystery even among scholars today. Augustine couldn't read or write Hebrew or Greek. In his work Confessions, Augustine recalled the difficulty he had in learning Greek, and that despite cruel threats and punishments, he didn't understand a word of it. Augustine relied rather heavily on Latin translations of the scriptures, such as the Vetus Latina, also known as the Old Latin, and eventually Jerome's Vulgate. While the Hebrew spoke of yetser and the Greek of epithumia, the Latin translated these terms as concupiscence. Concupiscence has both a noun and verb form in Latin and essentially means a strong, base, and sensual longing, as in sinful lust. Thus, man's God-given drives, desires, and appetites took on a more sinister connotation. In his Confessions, Augustine wrote of concupiscence as sinful lust and sexual arousal. What was it that I delighted in, save to love and be loved? But I held it not in moderation, mind to mind, the bright path of friendship, but out of the dark concupiscence of the flesh, and the effervescence of youth exaltations came forth, which obscured and overcast my heart, so that I was unable to discern pure affection from unholy desire. To love and be loved was sweet to me, and all the more when I succeeded in enjoying the person I loved. I befouled, therefore, the spring of friendship with the filth of concupiscence, and I dimmed its luster with the hell of lustfulness. And yet, foul and dishonorable as I was, I craved, through an excess of vanity, to be thought elegant and urbane. But I, miserable young man, supremely miserable even in the very outset of my youth, had entreated chastity of you, and said, Grant me chastity and continency, but not yet. For I was afraid lest you should hear me soon, and soon deliver me from the disease of concupiscence, which I desired to have satisfied rather than extinguished. Augustine taught that Adam's sin was transmitted by concupiscence, and that is to say, sex, and thus he concluded that we are all born possessing that same guilt and sinful nature once possessed by Adam, that when God creates us, he withholds grace, and thus we suffer from a privation of good. So where the scriptures deal with God-given drives and appetites which can be used as God intended or abused, Augustine's view became much more bleak and out of step with Scripture. Now, rather than men being called to rule over their appetites and being accountable for their misuse,
sit down. I'm a victim of circumstance.
Now, under Augustinian philosophy, men were viewed as victims of their appetites, cursed to sin by God before they were ever created. In this episode, we considered the meaning and origin of the term concupiscence. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this series with your friends and family, and please do not hesitate to message us with a specific passage you would like us to consider. Thanks for watching.